Welcome, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us as we navigate some technical difficulties. And hopefully, if you missed the beginning of this, you can check it out via our recording. But welcome to our Lunch and Learn about how the Farm Bill can help create a healthier Mississippi River. We're really proud to be hosting this webinar as part of our third annual Mississippi River Network's River Days of Action. Woohoo! From June 8 to 18, you are joining thousands of people who are attending over 30 events hosted by more than 50 organizations and community groups, all up and down the Mississippi River watershed, in person and online, like we are today, and maybe some in the future virtual watching along on YouTube. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Mississippi River Network is a coalition of now nearly 70 organizations and businesses working together to protect and care for the people, land, water, and wildlife of the Mississippi River. The network implements the One Mississippi program, which has grown a community of over 20,000 supporters and inspired thousands of simple but meaningful actions. You're here as part of River Days of Action, and actually you are at one of our most exciting events because it has to do with our unified policy action for this year. So every day as part of River Days, we try to promote a timely advocacy opportunity where we can speak in one voice for the river. Last year, we were advocating for a geographic program for the river. This year, we are talking about Farm Bill and asking Congress to protect and increase funding for vital Farm Bill conservation programs. And I'm not going to say much more about that at this event because that is what we are here to learn way more about. All of you will know everything there is to know about the Farm Bill and conservation programs from two of my most favorite people who work on these issues, Jesse Womack from the National Sustainable Ag Coalition, or NSAC, and Liz Rupel from the Illinois Stewardship Alliance. And I just really want to thank them for being here. A lot of the content that is in today's webinar is inspired by their work and many of the webinars that we've put on in the past. We really rely on our members like NSAC and ISA to be at the cutting edge about educating folks and talking about these issues. So you're in luck because you're about to learn a lot more about this and how we are going to take action. I will share this link in the chat later. But our flow for today's presentation, and we may run a little over time since we are running late, but we'll share the recording afterward. And please, if we will try to still get through all of the info. Jesse and Liz, are you able to go a little over time, or what's your schedule? You're good? Okay, great. But we will still try to keep within a couple of minutes of the hour. But here's our flow for the next 45-ish minutes. We're going to talk about the connection between ag issues and our Mississippi River. Then we're going to dig into what the Farm Bill is. Jesse's going to lead us through that, as well as what are conservation programs in the Farm Bill. And then finally, Liz is going to wrap up with what states and eaters can do and all the amazing work that Illinois Stewardship Alliance is doing on the ground. So first off, we're river people. You're here because you care about the Mississippi River. Why do we need to think about the Farm Bill? Well, I suspect that if you are here and logging onto this webinar, you probably have an inkling about the connection between these things, but it always helps to have the background information and kind of review what the connections are. So I'm going to begin with a series of maps. Here's a map of the Mississippi River and its watershed. Hope I'm sure many of you have seen a map like this before. Our Mississippi River's watershed is tremendous. The river forms a border or flows through 10 states. Those are the main stem states that the Mississippi River network focuses on. So if you can see my cursor here, the main stem, the headwaters of the Mississippi begin up here in Minnesota and run all the way down to the Gulf. But the river forms the border or is part of, it forms the border, all are part of 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces drain into the Mississippi River. And all of that totals over 40% of the contiguous United States. And the river accounts for 90% of all the freshwater flow to the Gulf of Mexico. So the shaded area on the map shows everything that is considered the Mississippi River's watershed, and that includes all of its major tributaries, the Missouri, Illinois, and Ohio. I'm going to highlight right now. And that's going to take me, we know, well, let me say here also we know that what happens in one part of the river impacts all of the rest of the river. That's why we work in a 10-state way. We focus on the entire river watershed. So what is happening in the watershed? This is going to be my second map here. And again, let's orient ourselves to the main artery of the Mississippi River. Here's headwaters in Minnesota, all the way down to the Gulf. The major tributaries, the Missouri River, the Illinois, and the Ohio River here. And this map is showing us the percentage of land that is devoted to growing 6 major categories of crops. So we have corn, soy, wheat, cotton, hay, and the catch-all category of everything else, fruits, nuts, and vegetables. The darker the shading, the higher the percentage of that land that is used to grow that crop. So we can see here how concentrated our crops are in the upper Mississippi River and directly along the river's main artery from headwaters to Gulf. Corn covers more land in the US than any other crop. Second is soy, and the majority of corn and soy goes to feeding livestock. And nearly half, 45% of corn growth goes to ethanol. So contrary to a lot of common parlance that you might hear, our monocultures of corn and soy actually fill cars and feed animals in confinement. And again, this map is just showing us the concentration of all of that happening, certainly in the upper Mississippi River watershed and all along the artery. Next map. So this map is showing us the value of both crop and livestock operations in the US. Let's again orient ourselves to our river. Here is the main artery, the 10-state main stem corridor, beginning with the headwaters in Minnesota, all the way down to the Gulf, the major tributaries of the Missouri, Illinois, Ohio here. And again, the greener areas are showing us the most valuable areas for crop production, and the redder areas are showing us the most value derived from livestock operations. And again, it's very easy to see in this map that concentration of crop and livestock value coming from the upper Mississippi River basin and all along the river as you follow it headwaters to Gulf. Last map. So we know that what happens on the land impacts our waterways. And, you know, we have choices every time we engage in livestock and crop production. It can happen in a way that promotes sustainable outcomes, or it can happen in a way that promotes degrading outcomes. And we know that the process of monocultures is environmentally taxing. Monocultures require tremendous fertilizer inputs that unfortunately run off into our waterways. I'm a gardener. I know we need nitrogen and phosphorus to grow plants, but what we have going on in the Mississippi River Basin is way too much of a good thing. 150,000 tons of phosphorus and 1.3 million tons of nitrogen end up in the Gulf of Mexico annually. So again, what happens in one part of the river impacts all of the rest. And, you know, the upper image here is showing the river's watershed again. That agricultural overlay is there in yellow, and a lot of our developed kind of, you know, urban centers where we're also seeing runoff pollution. And that is contributing to what we see here on the bottom right, the Gulf Dead Zone every year, which has a tremendous impact not only to the fisheries in the Gulf, but we know we experience those dead zones or hypoxic zones in the form of lake closures, beach closures. I live in Wisconsin. We see harmful algal blooms and toxic algae that close down our lakes and beaches every single year. And that really brings us to the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is one of the most important vehicles that we have to kind of drive the decisions that are made about ag and natural resource issues that impact the Mississippi River. So with that, I am going to just hand it off to Jesse to talk about what the Farm Bill really is.
Awesome. Thank you, Maisah. Hey, everybody, Jesse Womack, pronouns he, him. I cover conservation policy for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. And we've got about 150 member organizations like MRN all across the country, and all of whom are very deeply engaged on agricultural policy work, and often have farmer members themselves that are trying to do the good work of reversing all of the harm that Maisah was just talking about on the ground. And all of us care very, very much about improving farm bills so we solve these massive environmental challenges. So that's a bit about me and NSAC. I think we can move to the next slide. When we're thinking about what the modern Farm Bill is and how it has helped to bring us to the problem we face today in terms of water quality degradation and soil erosion and whatnot, it's important to think about the history of where the bill came from as kind of a starting place. So you're looking at a photo of the Dust Bowl here on the screen, and this is sort of where our modern Farm Bill was born. During the Dust Bowl, Franklin Roosevelt combined three separate but related bills to try to tackle major environmental and agricultural challenges that were coming to a head at that time. Correcting things like catastrophic erosion as envisioned in this photo, as well as a lack of support for farmers in the face of huge drops in prices. Trying to address these things sort of became the basis of our modern conservation programs and some of our crop support programs that really helps to generate those cropping maps that Maisah was showing, which crops take up the vast majority of arable land in our country. And it's really important to acknowledge that, because a lot of those cropping patterns would not exist without the Farm Bill sort of making it so. So some of our problem is really baked into this bill kind of from the jump, and it has been for years and years. It's also really important to note that the history of the Farm Bill is one that is mired with racial discrimination. Some of the programs that have benefited commodity producers, monoculture producers exclusively, have often directly harmed Black and brown farmers across the country and led to pretty insane land consolidation in the hands of white farmers over the decades. Right? If you look at agricultural statistics for our modern era, the vast majority of corn and bean farmers are white men, and the vast majority of our arable acres are in those two crops, and the Farm Bill helped make that come to pass. So understanding a couple of those high level things is really important as we start thinking about, well, what do we do with the modern Farm Bill to solve environmental challenges as well as improve racial equity outcomes on the landscape? Next slide. So moving from history to more of an understanding of our modern Farm Bill. What is a modern Farm Bill? Well, it's one of the biggest pieces of legislation we pass in this country. It's thousands of pages long. All these books on the screen here are over 1,000 pages long. It is a big, beefy piece of legislation. We call it an omnibus bill because it spans so many different topic areas and really creates and authorizes dozens and dozens of important programs that really help shape agriculture and food policy in this country kind of writ large. Next slide. This is just a quick summary of all of the titles within a farm bill. So that massive omnibus piece of legislation is broken down into individual titles, just as a means of sort of grouping various topics that are addressed in each farm bill. And while we have 12 titles here, it's important to note that like not all titles are created equal. Some of these have programs that are considerably larger and more impactful than others. Next slide, please. This slide kind of illustrates that problem really clearly. If you'll note that really big green portion of the pie chart in front of us, that is all of our farm bill spending, $428 billion over the 5 years that a farm bill is authorized. At the time of its passage in 2018, the current farm bill was projected to spend about $325 billion of that on SNAP, 76%. That's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And this is another function of sort of the history of farm bills. We do a lot of direct farm policy in farm bills, but we also provide support for folks that need access to food during times of crisis in their lives via the farm bill. And this was a really political decision to marry ag and food security policy to ensure that both rural and urban voters had a stake in passing a farm bill every time it expires. A farm bill expires about every 5 years and then needs to be fully reauthorized. Our current farm bill expires this September, so we are deep in the reauthorization process right now. As I mentioned before, our modern farm bill is based on predecessors that really funneled a lot of money towards commodity crops and monoculture production. And you can see that here by the next two biggest buckets of spending for the commodity support programs and the crop insurance programs right there at $29 and $38 billion apiece. That is almost entirely money for corn farmers, soybean farmers, wheat producers, and rice and peanuts probably are sort of rounding out the top 5 there. Again, mostly industry is dominated by older white men and precious little funding headed out to other programs and other kinds of producers. Conservation is the next biggest bucket there. That's what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. And this is the bucket and the dollars that go to supporting farmers adopting voluntary practices on their operations to improve the environmental outcomes and environmental impacts of their farming. Everything else that the Farm Bill does fits in that little 1% bucket that's left. So you can sort of see the list there: horticulture, forestry, rural development, credit research. Everything else is in that 1%. And that doesn't mean that those programs are tiny or insignificant or not important to environmentalism in agriculture. It just means that we are not securing anywhere near as much funding for those things as currently dedicated to mostly corn and soy production at the federal level. So, next slide. While the Farm Bill covers a lot, there is plenty that it does not cover. And the bulleted list of all the things the Farm Bill cannot touch is sort of listed out here. This is a function of sort of who's assigned what responsibilities in Congress. The Farm Bill is written by a specific committee of jurisdiction, meaning a subgroup of legislators that have been tasked explicitly with writing the Farm Bill. And their mandate includes a set list of topics, and they can't touch anything else. So that's the House Agriculture Committee and the Senate Agriculture Committee. They're the ones that write the Farm Bill every time it's reauthorized. And these topics all fall outside of their committee's jurisdiction. So not relevant to Farm Bill. Very much relevant to food and ag policy, just something we have to address in other venues as food system advocates if we're going to do so. Next slide, please. So I've been saying the Farm Bill needs to be reauthorized every 5 years. What does that really mean? What does it look like every time we do it? And at its most basic, authorizing a Farm Bill means that the text we write down creates programs, and it decides what those programs are going to do, how long they are going to run for, what kind of funding each program will have, who can access those programs, who cannot. All that kind of stuff we define in statute when we reauthorize a Farm Bill. And that's really, really important because we can do a lot of wonderful things when we do that. If we're thinking about addressing racial equity in the food system, we can say things like X program, at least 5 or 30% of the total program dollars have to end up in the hands of BIPOC farmers, or we can design a program that is explicitly supposed to support the types of agriculture we know BIPOC producers are more likely to be involved in instead of monoculture production of corn and soybeans. We can do a lot of things there. The type of funding that we attach to a program once we authorize it is also a really big deal, and it's something we have to do in the Farm Bill. Typically, a program can have 2 types of funding attached to it. Mandatory and discretionary funding. Mandatory means that the day the House and Senate Agriculture Committee agrees on a number of total funding for that program, it's done. That program has that money. It is there for the life of the Farm Bill. That is contrary to discretionary authority, whereby the House and Senate Ag Committees will say, we think this program could use up to $50 million in a given year, but we're going to let appropriators decide how much money of that 50 million the program needs each fiscal year. And when that happens, funding for that program gets determined in the normal annual appropriations process that all of Congress goes through. From a food system advocate standpoint, that's a little less than ideal because it means we have to fight every year to ensure we have money for the things we like and the things we know we need out on the landscape or that we need to support producers. So it's always a very big deal whether or not your programs get mandatory or discretionary funding. For the sake of talking about conservation programs today, I will say the vast majority of that funding is mandatory, which is awesome. It means we have that big bucket of funding passed for conservation over the life of the Farm Bill, pretty much for sure. Once a Farm Bill is passed, then we move on to implementing those programs, and that's something that happens at the agency level. For conservation, that is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, though there are plenty of other agencies that help to implement Farm Bill programs, but we will move ahead for time. So next slide. This is just a quick illustration of what it looks like to reauthorize a Farm Bill. I mentioned the House and Senate Agriculture Committees are responsible for writing it. In practice, they each write their own version of the Farm Bill, and that is what the committees are doing today, right now. There are professional staffers on each committee that have been compiling feedback from folks like yourself, from farmers all across the country, from organizations like NSAC and MRN and Illinois Stewardship Alliance, and they are trying to get down on paper their favorite draft of what they want the next Farm Bill to look like. Once each committee has done that, they will pass it out and let the full chamber, the full House or the full Senate, decide if they're going to approve that committee's draft or offer amendments at that time. And once both chambers, both the House and the Senate, have a version they like, those 2 versions will go to conference. And any difference between the 2 versions of the Farm Bill will be ironed out before they're sent back to each chamber for final approval and finally to the president's desk for signature and passage into law. Next slide. For anybody that's done this before, it should be no surprise that the process rarely looks like that last slide. It looks a lot more like this one. There are detours, there are complications. It is never as clean and tidy as it is supposed to be. And so it's really really essential for folks that want to see good things come out of a Farm Bill to stay engaged and make your voices heard at critical points during this process, especially as things change and new opportunities present themselves. So next slide. So I've talked a little bit about conservation programs being the big bucket of money that goes to voluntary programs for farmers to implement changes to their agricultural practices. So think somebody that wants to try cover crops, somebody that wants to design a resource conserving crop rotation where they're adding new species into the mix of what they grow, somebody that wants to change up their tillage program to reduce the amount of erosion they create with their field work in a given year, somebody that wants to plant edge of field perennial cover of one kind or another to both support wildlife and keep nutrients out of the stream, all that kind of stuff. We can produce cost share for with our Title II conservation programs. Next slide. And it is really important for this Farm Bill in particular, that as we're thinking about those conservation programs as an advocacy community, that we know that this Farm Bill is the biggest opportunity we have had in decades to secure funding for these programs. Last summer, Congress passed what is known as the Inflation Reduction Act, and it made roughly $20 billion available for Title II Farm Bill conservation programs. That money, as it exists right now, is a one-time appropriation. That means once it is spent, it is gone. It is not a permanent increase to that 7% bucket you see here in the pie chart. The Farm Bill gives us the unique opportunity to turn that one-time appropriation into a permanent increase in this particular slice of the pie that we can then use next Farm Bill, the Farm Bill after, and the Farm Bill after that. So this is a really, really important year to show up and tell Congress, add money to the conservation title of the Farm Bill, add money to my favorite conservation program. We just haven't had this kind of opportunity before, and we really need to show Congress how much we care about increasing this funding. While the title as a whole has that sort of big number, 7% of the full Farm Bill spending, next slide is good. Within that, in that section of the pie, there are a handful of distinct programs that do distinct things. We'll run through those really quickly. One of those programs is the Conservation Reserve Program. And this is a program that is designed to sort of take land out of agricultural production for 10 to 15 to 30 years and put it into perennial wildlife habitat of one kind or another. This can be whole fields through the CRP general sign up, or it can be smaller, more targeted parcels through the continuous conservation program, which has a number of sub-programs meant to address unique challenges on the landscape, such as keeping water clean. There's a Clean Lakes, Estuaries, something Rivers program, CLEAR is the acronym, inside CCRP that just exclusively targets that program's dollars to improving water quality across the country. So really important program, really essential to getting perenniality out on the landscape. It's part of Title II of the Farm Bill. Next program, the Ag Conservation Easement Program in the right here, about $450 million per year in the last Farm Bill. This is a program that is meant to do two things. It provides an opportunity to restore and protect wetlands that are located on agricultural ground, a really essential activity to engage in. As we know, wetlands provide tons of ecosystem services and benefits to water quality and quantity type problems. And this program also allows for ag land easements that are meant to reduce development pressure on agricultural land and ensure that farmland stays farmland. It's a pretty big opportunity, this Farm Bill, to make sure that those lands that are preserved also have conservation plans attached to them. So land that is permanently dedicated to agriculture is also permanently committed to conservation. Yeah, that's the quick summary. This is just a quick visual of some of what we're talking about when we say things like that permanent perennial cover that these programs can pay for. This is a prairie strip installed in what looks like a soybean field, but I may be completely wrong about that, so apologies if I am. But this is the kind of thing that we can be paying for with, I believe most of our conservation programs have a way to compensate for prairie strips. But yeah, just a visual example. 2 additional working lands conservation programs. So really meant to touch down on properties where folks are actively farming. It's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, and the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP. EQIP's got about 1.8 billion per year in Farm Bill funding right now. CSP, as of this fiscal year, is up to 1 billion years, but it had kind of a stair-step thing going on. And both of these programs offer cost share for farmers to implement practices. EQIP offers usually shorter term contracts to do both in-field type practices as well as some structural type practices. And I believe covers usually about 50% of the cost for farmers, and something in the order of like 75 to 90% of cost for socially disadvantaged farmers. That's USDA speak for BIPOC producers. CSP, no structural practices, much more in-field management, much more whole farm type planning. Folks that enter into 5-year CSP contracts are really encouraged to think about their operation as a large system, and for every practice that they install over the life of the contract, NRCS provides additional financial incentive for folks to enhance those practices or bundle a series of practices together to ensure maximum environmental benefit. So CSP is an incredibly important program in the conservation space, as we know that practices that are implemented together and improved over time are often the practices that yield the greatest impacts in terms of soil health or improvements to water quality. And we really need to encourage folks to be doing that kind of whole farm, holistic thinking with our public investment. Next slide. A couple more photos here. You can see a high tunnel greenhouse growing situation on the top here. EQIP is able to cost share for high tunnels to support mixed vegetable diversified type producers. And in fact, they have a whole initiative dedicated explicitly to getting high tunnels out to farmers that need them. And then on the bottom, you can see a photo of Paul Mugg. He's one of the practical farmers of Iowa folks that does a whole lot of sort of citizen science and research trial type stuff out on his farm. I believe this is a photo of him showing folks a beetle bank that he installed with the CSP program. Yeah, so next slide. Really important thing to understand. Not only is this a really important year for just opportunity to secure increased conservation spending or increased conservation funding in the Farm Bill, we're also looking at a couple straight years of pretty low success rate for folks trying to get into the program. If you're looking at the last couple of years here from 2018 forward, that's all the years of this current Farm Bill, we've got both EQIP and CSP down below 30% of applicants to each program successfully getting contracts. And this tells us point blank period, demand for these programs is high. There are a lot of farmers that are willing to do voluntary conservation, improve their impacts on water quality and other environmental problems. And we are telling them no right now because Congress has not made enough money available. So hugely important context for this Farm Bill. Next slide. One final conservation program, or may not be the final one we cover, but another conservation program is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, authorized at about $300 million of mandatory funding per year in the last Farm Bill. This is a unique conservation program that seeks to pair public investments with private investments. So coalitions of partners that want to put together an RCPP application have to bring match to the table and then commit to working with NRCS to get in touch with farmers in a specific geography, either a critical conservation area or a state, and start doing conservation work with those farmers. RCPP offers a lot of flexibility for the partners that put applications together, and you can sort of take ownership on the type of practices you want to encourage for farmers in a given geography, as well as who is going to make sure they work with those farmers day in and day out to get conservation on the ground. So kind of a hybrid approach to conservation with that program. This is just a map of where RCPPs are touching down around the country. And you can see there are some states that are doing better than others. This is at least in part a function of CCAs, critical conservation areas that seek to target RCPPs in areas of concern in the country. I believe at least one RCPP is in the Mississippi River watershed, very much to address water quality concerns. So there's a bit of targeting that's really relevant to the Mississippi River built into the RCPP program. Next slide. Conservation technical assistance. So this is a little bit different than everything I was just talking about in terms of cost share type programs or programs that provide financial support directly for farmers to do a thing. The CTA program is more or less NRCS's, or the Natural Resource Conservation Services, bucket of funding through which they pay staff to go out and talk with farmers. This is the Technical Assistance Fund at NRCS. And so this is used for one-on-one work with farmers and to pay staff who are developing conservation plans that support farmers implementing all the practices they want to do and are receiving cost share for in the other programs we just talked about. So CTA is not something that is distributed by the Farm Bill. That is an annual appropriations item, but it is an important thing to keep your eye on just because it really ensures there is manpower out on the landscape to do all the good things we want to do with conservation programs. Maisah, I don't know if you want to maybe pinch it for this slide, as I think this is,
this is just my example of what can be funded under conservation technical assistance. So MRN was a recipient of one of NRCS's racial equity cooperative agreements. And we use that funding to launch a mentorship program for BIPOC young professionals interested in a career in conservation and agriculture. And as Jesse said, you know, the seeing farmers of color, seeing people of color in those state local agency offices is like one way that we can try to address or begin to address some of the structural inequities and just the inherent lack of trust that BIPOC farmers and producers rightfully have about approaching some of these programs or these agencies. So this is just an example of if we can increase conservation technical assistance, these are the kinds of programs that we can encourage to build out some of the equity outcomes in the next Farm Bill.
Awesome. Thank you, Maisah. And I think the last thing Farm Bill wise I'm going to cover here is a series of provisions called Swamp Buster, Sod Buster, and Sod Saver. And really high level, these are the three kind of bare minimum things that we do ask of the farmers that receive commodity support payments or crop insurance support from the Farm Bill. We ask those folks not to till up wetlands, not to break up native sod in a very small geographic area, and to limit the amount of erosion that is occurring on highly erodible or held ground. Really important thing to know here, that this is the closest thing we have to serious regulation on most of our commodity producers in the country. Agriculture is famously one of the least regulated industries in the country. And as of right now, though people will call these three provisions conservation compliance, they are not regulations. These are more or less just things we prod folks to do in exchange for receiving public support, right? So those two big farm bill buckets I outlined, commodity support payments and crop insurance support, 15, 16% of the whole farm bill. All we are saying with these provisions is if you want to get that money, if you want to get that support, you have to do this bare minimum thing of not ruining wetlands, not ruining highly erodible ground, and not ruining native sod in key parts of the country. This is something that is like really politically difficult to improve. It's been sort of a long-standing failing of our farm bill not to increase the things on this list and make stronger requirements for commodity producers that are accessing that big bucket of farm bill spending. And it's looking like this won't be something we can accomplish this farm bill. We just do not have the political support. But that if any of you in this room are angry at the thought of billions of dollars of government support going to folks that are very unwilling to do the bare minimum in terms of environmental protection, increasing conservation compliance, increasing the number of provisions on this list would be something I hope all of y'all care about and stay engaged on for the next farm bill cycle. And with that, I think I'm going to conclude my piece and hand it over to my colleague Liz Rupel to talk a little bit about the real day-to-day of actually doing the advocating.
Thanks, Jesse. Thank you, Maisah. Yeah, I am Liz Rupel, lead organizer at the Illinois Stewardship Alliance. Really appreciate you all for inviting us to be a part of the River Days of Action again. I'll talk a little bit about how the Stewardship Alliance uses community organizing tools to build power at the state and federal level. And I'm going to make I'll try to tie in one of our wins that kind of shows what we can do at the state level that also benefits some conservation at the federal level too. So I'm trying to create a nice positive feedback loop here. So a little bit about ISA, I'll drop our link in the chat here. We are farmer driven and eater powered. So that means we're working closely with the farmers at the heart of our food system to identify and untangle the deep rooted issues of our food system. And we work closely with eaters to shed light on those issues, use their purchasing power and political power to create change. So we bring these two groups together in these two caucuses, a local food farmer caucus and a soil health farmer caucus to build our policy agenda. And our eaters help us pass that policy agenda. And we're slowly trying to recreate our food system here in Illinois so that it can work for everyone. So we can go to the next slide. But we know we can't solve it all. So we use policy as a tool to not only bring change, but to build power. So to transition to a more just and regenerative food system, we have to build power. So farmers and eaters who are directly impacted by this system that was created before all of us were born, we need power and a seat at the table where these decisions are made. So we see organizing around policy in these caucuses as a tool or a vehicle to build it. It's both a means and an ends, so we can accomplish something, but in the process, we're also building our organization, we're developing leaders, we are practicing the muscles of democracy, using our voice and becoming more visible and harder to ignore. So when we pass our policy agenda, when those farmers are using some good issue criteria to build our campaigns, together we can create some potential to win policy, build power. And then when we do that, we can accomplish three things that are shown on the circles there. So when we win on an issue, we make real, meaningful change in people's lives. We build the organization. So that could look like expanding our membership, maybe making a little money, gaining strength and credibility, developing leaders, and doing that shifts the narrative. So that changes what people believe is possible. It expands the experience and the agency of our members, and it can lay the groundwork for the next win so we can keep going. And we'll hop to the next slide. And I know that When I say power, sometimes it gets a bad rap, but Dr. King reminds us that though that power is benign, it is the ability to achieve a purpose. Whether it's good or bad depends on the purpose. So it can be used for good or bad. We define power as the ability to act and to make things happen in a way that either helps or hurts our families, our environment, our community. The root of a lot of the issues that we work in this sector is that we're powerless at the state and the federal level. People who don't have power, the power to protect or advance their own self-interest can get stepped on or steamrolled or divided. And we know that our power starts with internal organization, our unity, and our willingness to fight, as well as our ability to recruit allies like MRN, NSAC, et cetera, to build this powerful movement around our issues. So we'll go to the next slide. So by using people power at the state and the federal level, we can tackle state policy and this enormous piece of food and farm policy, AKA the Farm Bill. I find this model pretty helpful to understand what we mean and what power looks like for us. So as you can see, the bottom is we're powerless, and then it goes up to powerful. So you go from not even being on the radar to having a seat at the table. It can fluctuate and look different depending on the issue that you're dealing with. But we try to keep in mind that there are 3 R's of organizing. The first 2 is you need recognition. If they don't see you, there's no you to respond to. We want to earn respect. And perhaps that can, we can get the recognition, but that doesn't mean that we're respected. Respected is when, I call, they'll answer. If I say, hey, Representative Krishnamurthy, I am coming to Washington, D.C. because NSAC is holding this amazing fly-in for members. Can we meet? And he says, yes. So they want to consult and we're in relationship with them. And there's this shared self-interest and this help, or there could be like a healthy fear of what you're capable of. So they want to meet with you and see what's up. So the next slide. Oh, there's our 3 R's. Oops. And our next slide is, so we try to gain recognition and respect by connecting our members with lawmakers. Each year we've done something around the farm, out on the farm to bring members and eaters together to make their voices heard on Farm Bill priorities. So we'll have roundtables. We've done this dishing on the Farm Bill adventure where we're educating our eaters. And we also make a point to help our members build relationships with state legislators by seeing if they'd be interested in hosting legislative farm tours and in-district meetings. So these are a couple tactics that not only build relationships, but give our members a platform to use their voices. So when legislators show up, it shows that we're gaining their respect. This year, we're going to host a set of roundtables with a small group of constituents across the state with each of the 5 House Agriculture Committee members in Illinois in an effort to share more of some of these top priorities that are on the table for the Farm Bill. Speaking of them, in the next slide, whoa, we've got a lot of power. We have a really great opportunity here in Illinois to gain respect and recognition because we have 5 members of Congress on the House Agriculture Committee. We have Representative Mary Miller, Representative Bost, Budzinski, Jackson, and Sorensen. And we have a state senator, Dick Durbin, on the Senate Ag Committee and Appropriations, and a Representative Lauren Underwood, who sits on the House Agriculture Appropriations Committee. So there are a lot of folks here in Illinois. I know I have some Illinois friends out there. Maybe drop your state just so we can see where everybody's from, but we've got a lot of work to do and a lot of opportunity here in Illinois. And we'll go to the next slide. So in addition to some face-to-face meetings, other tactics, grassroots tactics is like we've had postcards that highlight some of the top food and farm priorities for climate conservation that we have sent to members of Congress. Online action alerts are a really great tool too. NSAC, we work so closely with you all and you provide such great material that we can just adapt and send out to our members. And all of this is to say that the more legislators hear from you and your community on why you think an issue is important, the higher the likelihood of these issues getting included, say in the Farm Bill, or maybe we're passing something at the state level. I've heard a lot of legislators, state legislators say that, man, we never would have even heard of an issue had you not scheduled a meeting with us, or had you not told 400 people to send us an email about the same thing. So it works. It really does work. So our next slide is all of these tactics can be used to get us to that third R, which is results. So I think, Maisah, if you click one more time, it shows another slide. Oh, geez, we're going to have to click 4 times. I forgot to take those off. So
I apologize, but I'm gonna jump back on
results.
my call. It's nice to
This
meet you.
page-
Thanks for holding my dog.
Oh, this page shows that people power at the state level can get us some results. And we work with members, our partners, to get a lot of things done, ranging from conservation funding to piloting a local food infrastructure program. And one win in particular that I would love to highlight that really ties back into this conversation today is a win on conservation funding. So I'll drop a link here. You can read a little bit about it. It was called the Partners for Conservation Reauthorization Act. And basically it means that Illinois protected a supercritical conservation program that provides funding to state agencies like our Department of Natural Resources, Department of Ag, EPA, and our soil water conservation districts, who provide assistance to the public in conserving and protecting soil, water, and natural resources in an effort to promote soil health and water quality and work towards some nutrient loss reduction targets. So this is like technical assistance and cost share dollars like Jesse had highlighted earlier. And by doing all of that, it makes farmland a little more profitable, resilient to changing climate, and it helps us, if you're not a farmer, eaters, maybe with our drinking water. So, and referring to Jesse's mention of the IRA, there's a lot of historic opportunities for states like Illinois to match these conservation programs. So match funding, get more funding for conservation in our states. So I just wanted to tie those two in to show why state wins can also lead to some big, it all ties together. State and federal things tie together. Our next slide, I know you've already seen this similar image earlier, Maisah talked about it, but I want to magnify it to the Illinois perspective and reinforce the message about why conservation dollars at the state and federal level are so important, not only to farmers and the environment, but to you as eaters. In Illinois, we have a nutrient loss reduction strategy. Our state has joined other states around the Mississippi in an effort led by the US EPA to reduce our nutrients in the states that contribute to the pollution in the Gulf of Mexico. The next slide. We have these benchmarks that we are supposed to hit by 2025 that are outlined in reports. But the long story short here is Illinois is way behind in our goals. We are supposed to hit a set of nitrogen and phosphorus reductions by that year, and we are centuries behind. The next slide, there's a glimpse of what the report has told us. We get these biennial reports, and so one of the last ones told us that nitrogen loss isn't stopping. Climate change is a huge driver. There are some really wet years and not many crops like cover crops, which are planted to cover the soil, increase fertility, add biodiversity, retain water. They're a really great way to keep nutrients in place. And they, there wasn't a lot of cover crops planted, so nutrients ran off. And that shows that ag, like Maisah said, is a really big driver to this problem that we have. And we have a lot of work to do. Our next slide. When I first heard about, this can just show a little bit about like why we're so far behind, but I think we'll go to the next one. When I first learned the term nutrient loss, I thought it wasn't a good thing. I thought it was a good thing, but nutrients, like Maisah said, in a big stock are not good. They are, causing havoc in our waterways, the mighty Mississippi, lakes and streams, and our drinking water. To bring it all back in our last slide, one of the ways that we can tackle this enormous problem is by creating opportunities for farmers to voluntarily adopt conservation practices, demand that lawmakers protect and increase conservation by using our voices, and demand that lawmakers and, you know, oh, sorry. So we can take these quick actions when MRN, ISA, or NSAC sends them to us. Let's make the calls. Let's write our legislators. Your actions can make a huge impact at both the state and federal level. And for this issue in particular, by demanding protection and increasing conservation funds at both levels, we can create those positive feedback loops. The more funding farmers have to voluntarily adopt practices, the higher likelihood that less nutrients are going to run off, which benefits the Mississippi, benefits us. So in summary, your voice really, really matters. Your story really, really matters. And farmer members, so that was the, okay, let's just take action. We'll stop. No, you're fine, Maisah, go ahead.
You should tell us about your farmer members.
Well, this is NSAC's climate rally.
Yeah.
Terrific event. And those are our farmer members got to hold the sign leading the charge at the rally. It was really awesome. And they're demanding action on climate change and the passage of the Agriculture Resilience Act. So it's just showing us that if we don't stand up and speak for ourselves, someone else can speak for us. And it's really important that your lawmakers hear from you. So Maisah is going to tell you about an action alert that you can take right now.
I couldn't have asked for a better segue for both Jesse and Liz. So we have an opportunity for all of us to take action to support and protect those conservation programs that we all just learned about. Maybe Michael can help me put the link in the chat, or else the short link is here on the slide. And as I think, both Jesse and Liz alluded to, this Congress in particular is facing, it's a very tough Congress to pass new spending, to talk about spending. So kind of everything is on the table in terms of what we need to play defense on and protect. And we know that in the last, for example, the House Republicans, when they released their version of the budget, there were cuts to programs that we support, but there were not so far any cuts to the conservation programs. And I really think it's because all of our organizations hammering since we've been there in January and March and now how much these conservation programs are important to us and our farmers. So it is a very timely action. You'll also see, I think someone asked in the chat, talking points for what to say to your congressperson. If you visit the action, we have all kinds of supporting resources for you there about, so the action will go literally to your senators and your representatives. So you'll be sending 3 emails to your decision makers, but also for your own edification, there's a bunch of resources there, all related to everything that you've heard here. So those will hopefully serve as your talking points if you're having meetings with your Congress people. And I guess we will move on to questions as folks have them. Thank you for hanging on with us. We have a question from Tegan, who's from the Ag and Water Desk. So it's a question about SNAP from one of the reporters. How do you expect changes to work requirements in the debt bill to affect SNAP, particularly in Illinois? And what are your concerns with SNAP in the Farm Bill?
I think that might have been for me. And Tegan, I might ask you to contact me offline. I can't quite answer that fully. I have a couple other staffers that are a little more present in the local food space and SNAP space that I can connect you with. So I'm going to drop my email in the chat here.
Great, thank you, Liz. Jesse, do you have anything? I will say, Tegan, I think just in general, it is like when we were in DC in March, for example, a lot of the meetings we were in, we were literally followed by like a bunch of nurses from elementary schools and other folks advocating for SNAP, all while we were like, we're here to advocate for protecting Title II. And I'll just say, like, it is a very challenging situation to navigate when, of course, as advocates for food systems, for public health, for our communities, it's very difficult to be in a position in this Congress where it is sometimes feeling like a zero-sum game, especially given like some of the House rules, which have to do with if you cut something in one, you have to cut something in one place if you increase it in another. So it's a false, it's just a difficult and false way to pit advocates who are all trying to do good things for their communities against each other, because it's not like any of us who are supporting Title II programs would want to see SNAP impacted, right? So I'll just say, as a non-nutrition SNAP expert, just that dynamic is a very troubling dynamic.
Yeah, and I will add on that it is also a very normal dynamic, right? It's very, very common when the House of Representatives is in control of, or Republicans are in control of the House of Representatives, that their version of the Farm Bill in its first draft does something really shitty to SNAP. But then the very standard reaction from everybody but the most extreme conservative ag interests in Congress is that's not okay. And Democrats in particular rally behind that, and organizations like all of us who work together on this kind of full-time rally around that. And the push to hurt SNAP usually dies in that version of the bill. And we end up with a conferenced farm bill that is nowhere near as troubling. I'm not, I can't pretend to be an expert reader of the tea leaves, but I think we're seeing some positive signs that the House won't get away with anything too awful this farm bill cycle, assuming they see that pushback from our communities. We've seen really positive things like the lead Senate Republican, John Bozeman, who is going to help write a version of the farm bill, come out and publicly say, all right, the debt ceiling was it. We're not going to tinker with SNAP anymore. And that's a really strong signal to send as such a significant Republican involved in the farm bill drafting process.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tegan. Okay, Trevor, does the loss of protections for isolated wetlands in the Sackett versus EPA case impact the importance of Farm Bill conservation programs moving forward? Great question, and the answer is yes. But yes, the pressure on voluntary programs like those Title II conservation programs that we just talked about is only going to increase because the federal regulatory floor for which wetlands are protected are now significantly narrowed. And I'll just say, and I'm eager to hear what Jesse and Liz have to say about this as well, and we, like Jesse showed in that chart, already know that the demand from farmers for these programs is nowhere near being met. So, it kind of we already were in a position where we wanted to invest a lot more in the voluntary programs. And now more than ever, those programs are going to be where most of this restoration and protection work can happen. And we know there's interest for it.
Yeah, and I guess I'll hop in and add that, the degree to which farm bill programs in particular become a solution to the problem created by the Sackett ruling will probably be driven most by the portion of wetlands that are now not protected that are also on or adjacent to ag land. Right, because all of the programs we have available in Title II of the Farm Bill are pretty tightly tied as to where they're allowed to touch down to agricultural production. So while the ASEP program, Ag Conservation Easement Program, has a wetland restoration component attached to it that in theory could be used to restore and place easements on wetlands that are no longer protected by Sackett or no longer protected by the EPA, like they would still have to be happening, or those wetlands would still have to exist in agricultural space to qualify for that funding. So I think it's an open question for the moment, just like the overlap of ag land wetlands and officially unprotected wetlands and what that's going to do to program demand.
Great point. We really appreciate you all taking the time to be here. Please, my final slide, and I stopped sharing my slide just so I could see everyone's faces and names, but we are here to be a resource. Please feel free to email us at MRN at any time. And also, if you're in Illinois, please sign up to receive Illinois Stewardship Alliance's newsletters, action alerts. They're doing fantastic work. And if you are not in Illinois, just check out our other members at MississippiRiver.org and find a local member in your state who is doing state-based work on Farm Bill. And then finally, go check out sustainableag.org, right, is NSAC's website. But yeah, find NSAC, sign up. NSAC is also often putting out action alerts and opportunities to engage on the Farm Bill at the federal level. So lots of ways to stay connected. We appreciate everything you all already do on these issues, and we will follow up with the recording. Thanks again for your patience with the